Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to our webinar this evening. We're honored that you've chosen to invest your time with us today. We know that you're probably having some crazy days at home with sheltering in place, so we appreciate your time. My name is Cindy Lopez, and I'm the Director of Community Connections here at CHC. My colleague Taylor is also on the line, and she and I will kind of be behind the scenes this evening, helping in the background with answering, with getting the Q&A going and anything that's going on in the chat and helping to troubleshoot. So just a couple of housekeeping items. If you hover over the screen with your mouse on your Zoom screen, you'll see the chat and the Q&A features. So please chat us if you have a comment or response or feedback. And then also use the Q&A for all your questions, and we'll gather all of our questions from the Q&A and make sure we have ample time at the end of the session, like around, well before 8 o'clock, so that we can answer all your questions. So as I said earlier, we are recording the webinar, and it'll be available to everyone free of charge in our online resource library in the next week or so. So just before we get started, just a few words about CHC. I'm wondering if you want to just respond in the chat. How many of you are familiar with CHC already or have attended one of our community ed sessions in the past? You can just type that right into the chat. CHC has actually been part of the Palo Alto community for about 70 years. And with the COVID-19 health crisis that's affecting all of us, mental health is even more important than ever before. So if you're concerned about your child or your family, please reach out, and we're here for you. We have services to help you. We have teletherapy available now through Zoom and Skype and phone, and they're both, teletherapy is safe and effective. So make sure that if you need services, please reach out. If you're feeling down, you're not alone. There's a lot of us in the same boat. So call and ask about our free 30-minute consultations with a licensed psychologist. And you can see all the contact information is on the slide. So next slide. And when we received all the directive to shelter in place about a month ago, we were able to pivot quickly and offer virtual services. So we're here and ready to serve you. And we know that the uncertainty of the time that we're living in right now can bring a lot of angst that results in anxiety and depression. So we're even providing, in addition to the services I've talked about, we also have virtual online speech and language and occupational therapy services. So we can help across many fronts. As I mentioned previously, we're delivering our clinical services for kids, teens, young adults, all via teletherapy, and we're also starting a new process group for teens through our clinic. So we offer lots of community education webinars like this, and we have another one on Thursday. We have 2 more next week. So if you're part of our email list, you'll get an update on those sessions every week. We also have virtual parent support groups and a curated online resource library, and that resource library is where you'll find all of our recorded webinars. And again, it's all free and easy to access. Our team at CHC, we really thoughtfully, personally, collaboratively work together to provide the services to children and teens and young adults and their families. And as you can see, we specialize in ADHD, learning differences, anxiety and depression, and autism. And we have all of the different services that you see on the screen to support each one of those. So if you want to visit us online or learn more about our services or access our services, you can visit us at www.chconline.org, and you're always welcome. So I'm going to stop talking and turn it over to our presenters. So let me introduce her. She's Dr. Pardis Khosravi, and she's a licensed clinical psychologist here at CHC. She specializes in conducting comprehensive psychological evaluations and provides evidence-based psychotherapy with adolescents and transitional age youth. She's received training in multiple evidence-based therapies and frequently integrates interventions and approaches from various modalities to best serve whatever the unique needs of the unique needs of her individual clients. So thank you for coming tonight, and I'll let Dr. Khosravi take it from here.
Awesome, thank you, Cindy. Let me go ahead and share PowerPoint. There we go. Okay. So hi, everyone. As Cindy mentioned, my name is Dr. Pardis Khosravi. I'm a clinical psychologist at CHC. And I just wanted to echo what Cindy said, and thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. I know the current realities of shelter in place, we're all juggling a lot, and time is very precious. And so I appreciate you all being here with us. And usually we do these webinars in person, and so it's easy to be interactive, but now that we are in Zoom, please feel free to share thoughts or comments in the chat. I think one of the biggest resources for parents is learning from each other, and so please, as we go along, share any thoughts or resources you have in the chat. Definitely share questions through the Q&A feature. We're going to save about 30 minutes at the end to answer questions, so definitely please keep those questions rolling in. So the focus of this talk is going to be on sadness and loss as it relates to our current circumstances. So shelter in place, COVID-19, and how what we're experiencing right now really is a collective form of grief, and how that grief is showing up for us and our kids today. How it looks the same, how it looks different given the shelter in place. And then we'll save the bulk of the time to talk about how we can cope and how we can help our children cope given the current constraints of shelter in place. So, first, what is grief, right? I think often when we think of grief as a response to death. But grief is actually sort of the emotional process we go through grappling with any kind of loss, even if that loss isn't exactly tangible. And so I really like it. If you haven't heard of Dr. David Kessler, he's a psychologist who worked very closely with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who is famous for the 5 stages of grief. And he really is a grief expert. And the way he defines it is that grief is a reflection of a connection that has been lost. And so whether that is as a result of death or it's just a different kind of loss, all of these things come with a grieving process. And so, I think it's important that we start to recognize that we are in the middle of a collective sort of grief. We're all losing something right now. You may have lost a loved one to coronavirus, or you may have lost a loved one unrelated to the virus, but shelter in place is impacting how you're able to grieve that loss. Or you might be mourning some things that are a little bit less concrete. And so some of the things that a lot of us might be grieving right now is the loss of our sense of physical safety. Right? For many of us, physical safety wasn't something we had to think about when we just, walked out our front door before. And now this sense of safety just walking outside of our house is gone. Loss of employment, job security, financial security rates. For some of us, we may have lost our jobs. And if we really think about that, that's actually a lot of losses rolled into one, right? It's not just the loss of income and financial security, but it's also a loss of routine. It's a loss of coworkers that might be friends. If you had a really awesome job that you loved at a place that you loved, that's a big loss, right? And of course, there's all of the anxiety that comes with the loss of a job and loss of income. Even if you haven't lost your job security might be a loss, right? Before, maybe this wasn't something we had to think about too much, and now we're worried about our company's, furloughs, layoffs, what might be coming down the pipeline. And so that loss of just general financial security. There's also this loss of the feeling that we can protect or care for our loved ones. Going over to grandma's house is very different these days, right? Going to take care of elderly parents, grandparents, it comes with a lot of other things that we have to consider. Loss of predictability and knowing what to expect from the future, right? There's this, I think there's this sense that all of these systems, right, our healthcare system, our education system, our economic system, they're sort of destabilizing. And so not knowing what to expect from the future, there's a loss of predictability around that. And the loss of predictability and uncertainty just around, you know, when is shelter in place going to end? What is life going to look like when shelter in place does end, right? I don't think there's a magic date where we can just all leave our houses and go back to life as normal. And so really this uncertainty around when is that going to happen and what is that going to look like? And so, you know, loss of normalcy, routines we used to have, daily habits, right? We're not waking up and sending our kids to school and driving to work anymore. And so it's a very different routine. Loss of independence, right? Especially this one, I think very much of our teens, of our young adults. Teenagers are action-oriented, right? They're supposed to be practicing for adulthood and concentrating on the development of themselves as an individual. And that has been in large part taken away, right? They're being treated like children with very little control over their life, and not because of anything they did, right? But they just, because of what's happening, they can't leave the house. And a lot of their independence has been taken away, right? Or maybe they now have to take care of younger siblings because parents are essential workers or frontline workers, and the typical childcare isn't available, right? So there's just a lot of loss of independence for all of us, but I think for our teens specifically. And then this is a huge one, loss of important milestones and public recognition of achievements, right? So, so many milestones for so many people, right? Weddings, children's first birthdays, right? Things that just, there's a moment in time and we don't get these things back. Graduations, right? I think for our high school and college seniors, it's such a huge loss. They're missing out on prom, graduation, end of year events and celebrations. For athletes or student athletes, their final seasons were very abruptly stopped, right? And so they're not going to get to finish out their season. They're never going to get to compete in that uniform again. And so they are really mourning the loss of this incredibly important developmental milestone that marks this critical transition into adulthood. And so it's a loss for them. It's also a loss for us as parents, right? These are losses for us as well, not getting to see our kids cross the stage for graduation, or helping our kids get ready for prom and taking pictures, right? And unfortunately, a lot of these things are things that they're not going to get back, right? A lot of schools, like, you know, maybe postponing commencements, and it's just not going to be the same in December as opposed to June. You know, or, you know, they're not going to get senior prom back. A lot of these things don't come back. And these are all, if we think about our own lives, memories that we all have. And this is just you know, the year, the generation that is going to miss a lot of these things. And then the loss of social connection, right? I think for everybody, no matter what age you are, this is incredibly difficult. For kids, you know, they went from seeing their friends in school every day or on play dates to not being able to see anybody their own age. For teens, their social group becomes so much more important at that stage of their life, and this is suddenly taken away, right? And I think we also need to think about their friendships might be dramatically shifting when they're not able to see each other in person. And so they might find that they're actually growing apart from their social groups. You know, for college students, particularly freshmen in college, but, you know, at any point, they're being forced to return to live at home instead of in dorms with their peers or apartments. And so they're going through this very critical phase in the transition to adulthood that we call individuation. They're figuring out who they are outside of their family. They're finding their people, their identities. They're developing the ability to care for themselves. And so the people they live with, their roommates, they become that primary source of support, or this family away from home. And all of a sudden that was taken away and they're asked to move back home. And so they are forced to regress a little bit. You know, for our teens, for our young adults, they have less life experience. And so they have less experience in how to manage these transitions. And they're at a phase of their life where social connection is so, so important. And so it's this double whammy of sorts. And, you know, a lot of these losses that we're talking about, these are ambiguous losses, right? An ambiguous loss is something that remains unclear and has no closure. So in contrast to an unambiguous loss like death, that, you know, that's a very finite point in time. And so there can be closure around that. With these losses, there is no closure. And actually, these things are still going on, right? We're not done with this. And so the challenge is to live with the uncertainty. And in a lot of ways, that actually makes the grieving process more challenging. So we've all heard of the 5 stages of grief, right? But I want to spend a little bit of time talking about what those stages might look like today. And as I talk about the different stages, Taylor, if you can throw up the poll, take a moment to reflect on where you are in the grief process right now. And it's an anonymous poll, so no worries. And so as I just talk through, just kind of think about where you might be. And so, denial might sound like things like, this whole thing is so overblown, what a media circus. Or it's the same as the flu. People get the flu every year and hardly anybody dies, right? Or I'm not elderly or immunocompromised, I'll be fine, right? That's the denial stage. And then we might get to anger, and that's more like, I don't care what the governor says, forget the shelter in place, I'm having friends over. Or this is all China's fault. If they had quarantined earlier, we wouldn't be having this problem. Okay, so that's anger. Then we get to bargaining. That sounds a little bit more like, okay, if I social distance for 2 weeks, everything will be better, right? Or this will all be over by Memorial Day. I'll be safe until then, and then we can go back to normal, right? Or it's okay to spend time with others as long as they wash their hands. And I know what people look like when they're sick, so as long as I stay away from those people, it'll be fine. Depression is more like thoughts like, I don't know when this will end, this is never going to end, right? Or I can't go to work, pretty soon I'll be broke and homeless, or this pandemic is the new normal, I can say goodbye to my hopes and dreams, right? And part of this depression stage, I think guilt is often very present during this stage in normal bereavement. We usually think of things that we might have said or done differently. And I think guilt is actually going to be amplified in this situation because our experience is going to be complicated by the quarantine and the shelter in place, right? We might feel more guilt that our loved one had to suffer isolated and unsupported. And on reflection, we might stop and be like, okay, actually, I couldn't have done anything differently. That is just what we needed to do at the time. But often that thought process isn't enough to suppress the feelings of guilt that might come with that depression stage. And then, finally acceptance. And so that sounds a little bit more like, this is happening. I have to figure out how to proceed. I can do my part by sheltering in place, washing my hands, learning how to work virtually. Or even thoughts like the world is going to change, but maybe when this is all over, we'll be kinder to each other. Right. And so Taylor, can we put up the poll results? Awesome. And so, yeah, I think at this point, I think we all probably could identify with all of these stages as we think back to the last, I don't even know however long it's been at this point, 6 weeks or so. But yeah, 63% of you said you're at the acceptance stage. It's you still in the bargaining, the anger stage. And I think, the important thing to also remember about these stages of grief is that they don't go in some neat order, right? Today you might be at acceptance and tomorrow you might be back to bargaining. And so we bounce back and forth. We may not actually experience a particular stage. We may have totally skipped anger or totally skipped denial, right? We don't all go through every stage, and we certainly don't go through them in some neat order. And so I really like this graphic. So yeah, the grief experience looks much more like the one on the right? We are all over the place, bouncing back and forth. And so I'm sure as you reflect, you can think about, days where you might have gotten to acceptance and then bounce back to that bargaining or the anger, or maybe the longer this goes on, you're noticing yourself kind of bouncing back to some of those earlier stages. And so, children experience grief very similarly to adults in a lot of ways. The stages are very much the same, but how it shows up might look a little bit different. So grief symptoms in children often look like regressions in behavior. So if you have little ones at home, you might notice them acting younger than their age. So you might see some regression in toilet training or the reemergence of baby talk. For older kids, it might look a little bit more like having shorter attention spans or having more difficulty sitting still. Frequent crying, anger outbursts, right? We're going to see a lot more behavioral expressions of anxiety and fear, just given the developmental stage that kids are at. We might also see more fear of being alone, fear of becoming ill, right? Kids are incredibly perceptive, and obviously, I mean, every kid knows what's going on because suddenly school is canceled and their routine looks very different, but they can, I mean, aside from that, they can sense the magnitude of this by our anxiety and our fear, and so they get that this is something very big. We might see some different social responses, so wanting to spend as much time as possible close to parents or caregivers, demanding more of your attention, or on the flip side, withdrawing more and engaging in more solitary activities, not coming out of their rooms. We might see changes in sleep, nightmares, trouble falling asleep. And kids often process new or stressful experiences through play. And so we might see kids, a difference in their play. We might see them playing doctor or playing house and insisting their dolls stay inside and wash their hands. And so these are actually very adaptive ways that kids express grief. And so it often shows up in their play as they struggle to figure out what is going on. Signs that you might be coping with grief, and these sometimes apply to us, they apply to our teens or young adults for sure. Trouble focusing on normal tasks, sleeping much more or much less than usual, feeling angry, feeling irritable, headaches, upset stomach, low energy, fatigue. Often when we are going through a grieving process, it actually brings up past grief, and so maybe re-experiencing feelings of past grief. Avoiding thinking or talking about the pandemic, right? Completely not watching any news, not wanting to talk about it, or engaging in activities like eating or online shopping to avoid anxiety. And then there's this thing that's called anticipatory grief. And this quote was from Dr. Kessler, and I just thought it so well explained it that I put the whole thing in here. But anticipatory grief is the grief that occurs before a loss. And so what he says about it, anticipatory grief is the feeling that we get about what the future holds when we're uncertain. Usually it centers on death. When we feel it when someone gets a dire diagnosis or when we have the normal thought that we'll lose a parent someday. Anticipatory grief is also more broadly imagined futures. There's a storm coming, there's something bad out there. With a virus, this kind of grief is so confusing for people. Our primitive mind knows something bad is happening, but you can't see it. This breaks our sense of safety. We're feeling that loss of safety. I don't think we've collectively lost our sense of general safety like this. Individually or smaller groups, people have felt this, but all together, this is new. We're grieving on a micro and a macro level. And so, you know, he really explains that well. It's this idea that something bad is coming, and so it's really anxiety, and this idea that we're mourning before we even know what we're going to lose, and we just have this general sense that the world is not going to be the same. And so anticipatory grief looks like feeling on edge, right? Like you're waiting for this other shoe to drop. And hypervigilance. So hypervigilance is when we're scanning for possible threats. So when our mind, that fight or flight system, knows that we are in danger and there is some sort of threat, our brain, and this is a protective thing, our brain is constantly scanning around us and we're more aware of our environment so that we can pick up on those threats. But when that system gets, that switch gets flipped perpetually on, right, then it looks more like reacting really strongly if someone nearby coughs, right? Becoming really irritated if a stranger isn't properly social distancing, right? So, you know, I went to the grocery store the other day and somebody was standing way too close to me in line, and I noticed myself having a very kind of strong reaction to that, right? That's that hypervigilance. It also looks like persistent anxiety, procrastinating on big tasks, being more easily frustrated or angry, withdrawing from others. And so, you know, things that might not have bothered us before, might not have frustrated us before, are now feeling like a really big deal. And the reason for that is that these, you know, these obstacles often serve as unconscious reminders that things aren't the same. So they trigger these feelings of grief and a sense of loss. And exhaustion, right? If that fight or flight system is on all day and it's releasing that stress hormone cortisol into our bodies constantly, we feel very tired. And so, you know, there's hope, there's resilience. I feel like the first part of this presentation sounds very heavy. And, you know, I think it's important to recognize that grief is difficult, but it's also natural. It's also useful. There's a reason that we go through this process. And to remember that people tend to be resilient in the face of grief. Once the immediate crisis is passed, people usually get to a place of acceptance and they're able to adapt and find ways to cope with their loss. So let's talk now about how we can cope with this collective grief and sadness that we're all experiencing. So, you know, one of the first things we're going to talk about is what grief rituals look like when somebody dies, given this physical distancing scenario that we're in right now. And then we'll get to how to cope with some of those more ambiguous losses that we talked about at the beginning. So, you know, death is typically followed by this period of saying goodbye and of these grief rituals. And those rituals are really for the living, right? They're our ability to access social support during a really difficult time and to say goodbye, to get this sense of closure. And so given shelter in place, that looks very different, right? We're limited to a very small graveside service. We can't have big wakes or memorials or different events because we can't have large gatherings. Or if somebody was exposed and they have to self-quarantine, they can't attend. And so that really makes it difficult. It deprives us of the ability to say goodbye. And then there's also, you know, this loss of religious or cultural traditions. For some people, these traditions are deeply spiritual in nature, and so not being able to perform these final rites can be another source of distress or loss. And so, you know, Dr. Kessler, again, he's a grief expert, he says that these rituals around grief are actually extremely important. And people without rituals tend to struggle more with grief. And anything that delays a funeral delays this natural mourning and healing process, right? We can't just pause on grief. People are going to continue to feel their grief, and they're going to have fewer options to express it and be supported. And so a lot of people are choosing to postpone funerals or services until people can gather again. And that, you know, everyone needs to do what feels right to them, and that definitely makes sense. And what he is emphasizing is it's important to do something virtually in the meantime, right? So those things can definitely be postponed and done later, and we still need to meet that need right now. And so, you know, looking for new rituals or seeking alternatives to the typical rituals. So different ideas, you know, utilizing video conferencing to participate in a memorial service of some kind, or just setting up times to video conference with family and share memories of the deceased, right? I think for many of us, our rituals around grieving somebody who has passed away involves a lot of food. And so, you know, we can't necessarily take food and have dinner with our close friends or family, but we can drop off food, we can order meal delivery, right? We can come up with kind of different ways to do that. Another one I saw was creating a shared album of pictures and videos to remember the person. And so coming up with these alternatives, recognizing that they're never going to be quite the same, and they are still better than something. And so I also want to spend some time talking about how to support ourselves and our children with these more ambiguous losses, like the loss of our sense of safety, loss of social connection, loss of milestones. And so, you know, I think the biggest message I want to send is that self-care is not about self-indulgence, it's about self-preservation. We have to take care of ourselves, put that oxygen mask on first before we help somebody else. And so how we take care of ourselves also models for our kids how to cope effectively, right? We're being that role model. And so, you know, what do we do as adults? And so Taylor, if we can throw up that second poll, and as I talk through some of these strategies, just take a second to reflect and see if you've been taking the time to take care of yourself. And we'll share the results at the end of the slide. And oops, sorry, my screen did something funky. Here we go. Okay. And so, the first thing I think is to name and claim your grief, right? And that is why we spent the first part of this presentation talking about grief and what grief is, because it's often helpful to put a word to it and to name it. People often have this vague sense of anxiety or this wordless suffering, and when we wrap some language around that, put some words to it, it can really help people understand what is happening. And to remember that your feelings are valid, right? And as I talk through these, a lot of these things are going to be things that we want to encourage our kids to do as well, right? They're great strategies for everybody. Remembering that your feelings are valid. So there's no right or wrong way to feel. You might feel differently and grieve differently than somebody else, and that is okay. And so staying away from judgments and also not comparing our losses, right? So we might look around and be like, wow, I've actually lost a lot less than some other folks I know, and so I shouldn't be feeling this way. And that's not true, right? We've all experienced some sort of loss, and we all have a right to grieve. And so giving ourselves time to feel those feelings, you will eventually get to a place of acceptance, but you can't rush it. And so when you name it and you feel it, it moves through you. Emotions need motion. I'm going to say that one more time because I think it's so important. Emotions need motion. And so what that means is that it's important that we acknowledge it and let it be, right? Let ourselves feel how we feel, and it will move through us. Where we get stuck in a certain feeling is when we try to deny it or make it go away. Practicing self-care, right? And here I'm talking about the basic basics, right? Making sure we're eating, staying hydrated, getting enough rest. Right? I think often those are the first things that go when we're in a time crunch. We have a lot to do. We're balancing a lot. I know for myself, there have been plenty of days where, I sit down to work and it's 3 p.m. and I'm like, oh gosh, I haven't had lunch yet. And so those are the first things to go. And they are so, so important. When we're hungry, when we're dehydrated, if we're tired, we're much more susceptible to our negative emotions. Considering ways that you've gotten through other challenging transitions, right? None of us have been through a shelter in place or a pandemic like this before, but we have been through other transitions. And so it helps to think about, how did you get through other difficult transitions in your life, whether it was losing a job, a divorce, a breakup, moving, anything, any big transition. And thinking about how did you heal, how did you recover, what coping strategies were helpful, and so in using those same strategies, right? Writing about the experience can also be incredibly powerful. And so sometimes with grief and anxiety that is caused by these very ambiguous losses, it feels too big and too large to think about. And sometimes just sitting down, like stream of consciousness, just write whatever comes to mind, or write about what you're observing, what you're feeling, what's challenging, right? It helps to get it out and to organize it in our minds. And to also, not just write about what's happening, but also writing about how you're managing the situation. Paying attention to your efforts and strengths helps us feel more resilient. And these are strategies that work for our kids as well. So, especially if we have older kids, teens, young adults, encouraging them, if journaling has been helpful for them in the past, encouraging them to write can be very helpful. Staying connected to others, right? When we're going through a really stressful time, often the urge is to shut other people out because we feel like we can't take on more from other people. But really staying connected with others, right? Virtual connection, it's not the same, but it bridges the gap, right? It's not the same as a hug. We're not going to be able to replace those things, and it's still better than something. And so thinking about ways that we can connect with others, whether it's, Zooming with other folks, FaceTiming, group chats, anything. Treating yourself with kindness, right? So not expecting that you're going to have your normal routine or You know, I've seen so many things going around on the internet about everyone's organizing their whole house and learning a new skill and baking fabulous thing, bread, sourdough bread, anybody? And so, you know, that's great. If you're doing that, that's awesome. And sometimes that distraction is what we need. And at other times, that's just having to think about doing one other thing is too much. And so, you know, recognizing that this is, it's not just about we all of a sudden have all this extra time and so we should be filling it doing other things. Sometimes it's just about practicing self-care and coping, right? And giving ourselves permission and understanding that this time is incredibly stressful. And so, you know, we might physically have a little bit more time, but our mental energy and our physical energy is tapped. And so being kind to ourselves, finding balance in what you're thinking, right? So that anticipatory grief, it's really anxiety. That's the feeling that we're talking about, right? And anxiety is a future-oriented emotion. Anxiety is about thinking about what could happen, right? All of those what if thoughts. Our minds go to the worst case scenario. And so when you notice yourself having those thoughts, thinking about that worst case, the goal is not to ignore it or to try and make it go away. If you've ever tried to make a thought go away, I think you know that it actually just comes back more. Our mind doesn't let us do that. And so the goal is actually just to find balance in what you're thinking. And so every time you notice that worst case scenario popping up, to then intentionally balance it with another different outcome, right? So if the worst case is, gosh, I don't know, that, you know, you got really sick and you're alone, right? Maybe then the flip side of that is, I might get sick, but it's going to be mild and the world continues on and everything will be fine, right? And so the reality is either of those are truly possibilities. And so it's not that we are ignoring either possibility, but neither should dominate our thinking either. We just want to keep that balance. And we want to stay connected with the present. So the anticipatory grief, it really is about the future. And so staying connected with the present can be really helpful. So if you practice mindfulness or meditation, that's an amazing way to stay in the present. There's so many great apps for getting started with a mindfulness practice. And Headspace is one of my favorites. But you know, there's also grounding techniques that are really short, really quick, but they bring us back into the present moment. And so if you look at the graphic on this slide, this is one of my favorite ones. I teach it to kids all the time. They love it. It uses your 5 senses. And so all it is you just stop. You know, you notice your thoughts are drifting to the future. And so you just stop and you think, okay, what are 5 things I can see, 4 things I can feel, 3 things I can hear, 2 things I can smell, and 1 thing I can taste, right? And so you just go through your senses and you, like right now in this moment, what are 5 things I can see, right? And you go through. And so that just, it serves as a way to bring yourself back to the present and to get you grounded with where you are at this moment in time. The other one that I really like that I teach kids all the time is using the colors of the rainbow. So asking yourself or your child to name 3 things in the room for every color of the rainbow. Right, so I'm going to look around and I'm going to notice 3 red things and then 3 orange things and then 3 yellow things until I've gotten through the rainbow. Letting go of what you can't control. I'm going to come back to this one because that's in a later slide, and so I'll speak more about it then, but it's the idea of really thinking about what you can control and what is outside of your control, right? So your neighbor, what your neighbor is doing, whether or not they're following the shelter in place, that's not in your control. What is in your control is that you can stay 6 feet away from them and wash your hands. And so really differentiating, when we focus on what we can't control, we often feel very disempowered. When we focus on what we can control, we feel much more positive. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that later. And I think the other thing can be to seek professional help for yourself, for your kids. You know, therapy, I might be a little bit biased, but I think therapy can be helpful for anybody. And Cindy mentioned at the beginning, you know, at CHC, we're doing teletherapy. Most agencies around here are also doing teletherapy. So therapy is done on Zoom, just like this. So it's very safe and can be this extra source of support. Taylor, can we get those poll results? Awesome. Oh, good. I was actually thinking it was going to be the other way around. So 46% of you said definitely taking time to utilize some coping tools yourself to manage your stress and grief. 42% said I tried to, but time is an issue. Totally makes sense. It really is. And then 12% of you were like, are you kidding? That's the last thing I can think about right now. Which also totally makes sense, right? We're all being asked to juggle quite a lot all of a sudden, and no one was prepared for this. And so, you know, I definitely challenge 5 minutes a day, whether it's right when you wake up, right before you go to bed, and just find some time to do something that is relaxing and increases your mood. And it really, truly, even just 5 minutes can be a game changer. Okay, so let's talk about how to support our kids. So, you know, again, listening and validating, right? And I want to say this over and over again many times. It's important for kids to have a safe place to talk and to express their emotions, right? Simply acknowledge their feelings. They get to be sad. It's okay to be sad. This is sad, right? This is frustrating. This is difficult, right? This is scary. And so letting them feel those things, right? Encouraging healthy grief. Trying to pinpoint the emotion your child is feeling, but allowing them to correct you, right? And so some of these emotion coaching phrases I really like. And so, you know, validating doesn't mean that you agree with it. It's just an acknowledgement of the feeling, right? And so I really like, I want to point out number 3, it's okay to feel how you feel. It's not okay to blank, right? And so often I think we get stuck, we don't want to validate behavior that is not okay or against the rules, but that underlying emotion can be validated, right? So could sound like, you know, it's okay to feel really frustrated. It's not okay to slam your bedroom door or whatever it is, right? We can validate and uphold rules and limits at the same time. And so avoiding minimizing kids' emotions, avoiding telling them how they should feel or trying to put a positive spin on things. Gratitude, silver linings, that's all super, super important and very helpful. And they don't always have to look on the bright side, right? We need to create space for kids to feel like they can feel sad or frustrated or angry or however they feel. And understanding that grief comes in waves, right? Some days are going to be harder than others. And so being open about it, if you're having a difficult day, and encouraging them to do the same can be very helpful. Encouraging our kids to use their coping skills, right? So it's important to let kids feel how they feel, but it's also important to teach them how to cope with how they feel in a healthy way. And so kids haven't gone through a pandemic before, right? None of us have, but they have felt scared, they have felt frustrated, they have felt angry, they felt sad, right? They've felt all these emotions. And so whatever coping strategies were helpful then are going to be the ones we want to rely on now. And so definitely feel free to share ideas of coping skills that have worked for your kids in the past in the chat box. I think, you know, parents learning from each other is one of the biggest resources. You know, so encouraging them to use deep breathing. So that's what this little graphic here is on the left. And so there's so many different ways to teach deep breathing to children. You can have them mimic blowing out candles on a birthday cake, or blowing bubbles, or, you know, actually blow bubbles. Or, you know, what I like about the shapes is that it's a tangible thing. So, you know, you can have a kid draw a square, and then they start tracing it, right, with their pencil or their finger. So they breathe in as they go across, and then they hold. And then they breathe out as they go across, and then they hold, right? Same with the triangle, same with the star, same with the little infinity symbol. And so that can help kids really slow down their breath. You know, or any sort of other coping skill, right? Music, drawing, sensory things like stress balls, putty, slime, distraction, right? Playing a game, reading a book, exercise, yoga, all of these things are super helpful. And it can really help them reduce the intensity of their emotions without turning to unhealthy things, like, you know, emotional eating, for example. And so really, I think also trying to do these different activities as a family can help kids it can model it for them. The other things are helping kids figure out what is and is not in their control, right? So I really like this graphic on the left. And so you draw a circle and you have them write all the things that they can't control on the outside of the circle. And so what we can't control is if others are following the rules of social distancing. We can't control the pandemic or how long the shelter in place is going to go on. We can't control the weather. We can't control the amount of toilet paper at the store, right? These are all things that we can't control. And then on the inside of the circle, you then write what you can control, right? So you can control your attitude, the words you use, what you spend your time and energy on, your own social distancing or following the rules of shelter in place, right? So these are all the things we can control. And when we focus on what we can control, we feel more empowered and we feel more positive. And so I often will recommend, if you do this, then post it up somewhere in the house. And so when you notice your kid kind of butting their head against some of these things that we can't control, to bring them back and to point it out and to have them refocus their energy on something that's within that circle. The iceberg is also a great tool. So this one is specifically for anger, but you can do it with any emotion. And so it's really about the analogy of an iceberg, right? So with an iceberg, we can only see just a little bit of it peeking out from the top of the ocean, and everything else is underneath and we can't actually see it. And so the example here is often we express anger and that's what other folks can see, but what's underneath it is feeling disrespected, embarrassed, hurt, rejected, right? There's so many other emotions that we often don't express and we don't see. So you can do this iceberg with any emotion, sadness, anger, anything. And so helping kids really put names to their emotions, right? Again, that idea that emotions need motion. So acknowledging it, naming it can be super helpful. And then the other thing I think is to create a plan, right? So in that moment of really high distress is not the time to start trying new coping skills or trying to figure out which one is great for that moment. And so sitting down and proactively creating a plan with your kids can be super helpful. Yes, so I see shared in the chat is definitely breathing techniques. Yes, that is huge. Okay. And then, establishing and maintaining routines, right? Our routines were completely upended, but kids really thrive on routine and structure. And that routine is just different now, but there still can be a routine. And so those routines and that structure is incredibly helpful. I'm going to go a little bit out of order. Encouraging your child to engage in activities that give them a sense of purpose and accomplishment. When we have this sense of accomplishment, productivity, or mastery, that really boosts our mood. We often feel much better. And so, can they bake cookies for neighbors, or do yard work for a neighbor, or wash cars in the neighborhood, deliver groceries to elderly neighbors or grandparents or whoever, right? Can they do things that help other folks? And so please go ahead and share in the chat if there's any activities that your children have been doing that give them a sense of productivity or of accomplishment. I think this is where we get some really creative answers from folks. And one of the things that actually a couple of my clients shared with me recently that I just thought was ingenious that I'm going to share with you guys. One of my clients is actually making a coloring book. She's very artistic, and so she's making a coloring book for a neighborhood child. And so she's really good at drawing, and so she's drawing a whole bunch of pages and she's putting it together and going to deliver this coloring book to a kid in her neighborhood. And somebody else shared with me, she's also very artistic. She is letting people commission her artwork in exchange for proof that they donated to a COVID-19 charity. And so she's really into oil painting and lots of other things. And so she's creating art for people, and all she's asking in return is to show her proof of donation. And so that's her way of donating and contributing, given her special skill set. And so, yeah, I'm taking a look at the chat, scrolling through. Yes, and so I do agree that arranging the time while you're working from home is definitely hard. It's a lot to juggle. Gardening, I love that suggestion, right? Gardening is huge, and it helps with kids getting outside, right? Getting outside out of the house and doing some stuff in the fresh air, getting in some exercise. Awesome. Keep sharing. I'll keep checking it. The other thing I think is to make new memories, right? Remembering that it's okay to be happy, it's okay to make new memories, and so starting new traditions, visiting new places virtually, right? A lot of museums, aquariums, national parks, they have virtual tours now. And so kind of doing some of those things, doing more things as a family. The other thing I love that I saw recently is a time capsule workbook. And so there's a link to it in the resources slide at the end that I'll get to. But somebody has created this time capsule workbook. There's one for kids, one for teens, I think, and one for adults. And so it's this awesome way to commemorate this very significant event. And so there's different pages that have kids kind of draw or write about different events and celebrations that occurred during the shelter in place, about just their experience and how they're feeling about what school is like. And so, and there's, you know, you can add in pictures and all sorts of things. And so once you're done, it creates this kind of memory of this very momentous historic event that we're living through right now. And so, you know, especially if kids are artistic, I think it's a really awesome project to get them to really express and channel some of their feelings into that. And then encouraging social connection, right? Making sure that our kids are still connecting with their friends. I think a lot of kids, especially if they're prone to anxiety or depression, have this tendency to withdraw. So really encouraging them to text their friends, to FaceTime with their friends. That there's a app called Netflix Party that I just learned about, where you can watch Netflix, like it syncs up your Netflix, and so you can watch the same movie on video chat. And so, you know, or there's so many online games, articles about games that have come out that you can play on Zoom. And so keeping kids really engaged with their friends can be huge. Yes, somebody just shared writing letters and making cards for family and friends. That is a huge way to just social connection, but also kind of that idea of productivity and feeling like they're of service to somebody else. That's huge. Yes, somebody else shared giving my kids breaks to FaceTime or Zoom with family members, right? That social piece. And then I got them a small indoor trampoline so they can get their sillies out. Yes, I love it. Letting them jump around is probably going to be huge, get their energy out. Yes, okay. And then, you know, the other thing, and I want to be mindful I don't go over too much so we have time for questions. The other thing is, you know, how do we help kids cope with all of these missed activities and milestones, right? That's a huge, huge loss. And so again, I'm going to say it one more time, validating their feelings, right? Acknowledging the sadness or disappointment or anger that they feel that they're losing, you know, graduation, end of year celebrations, prom, things like that. Or even for kids who aren't graduating, but maybe they have been working really hard for their school play, right? And all of a sudden that's canceled, or dance recitals or anything else that was coming up that all of a sudden they're not getting to do. And so really trying to pinpoint what they're feeling, right? If your kid isn't labeling that feeling, trying to help them label it, right? You know, it might be saying something like, I see you're really sad that you don't get to eat lunch with your friends anymore, right? Just helping them put words to it. You know, missing a school dance might seem minor in comparison to the prospect of losing your job. And so, you know, or kind of losses that we as adults are feeling. And so I think sometimes in moments of frustration, right, it can be easy to be like, oh my gosh, it's not that big of a deal. Like, get over it, right? And so I think it's important to remember that for them, that is a really big deal. And it is a very big it is the biggest loss that they might be feeling. And also remembering that for this generation, this is the biggest world event that they've experienced, right? Many of them are too young to remember 9/11. And so this is huge. And you know, when you're young, I think they're having to come to terms with this idea that life is not actually as predictable as we sometimes pretend that it can be. And so that's a very scary thought for our kiddos. You know, big picture, talking about the big picture, helping your child see that although the weeks might be dragging on right now, this time period is short in the grand scheme of life. And so we're not to invalidate, right? Like, this is very hard, this is huge, this is what we're all dealing with right now, and it's not going to go on forever. Talking to kids about how they're going to be reading about this in history books someday, right? How their grandkids are going to ask them questions about what it was like when all the schools closed. And so asking them questions like, how do you think you'll explain this to your kids someday? Right? It might help them just have a different perspective. Right? It might just get their gears turning about like, wow, how do I explain this? Again, that time capsule, we'll get to the resources in 1 second, I'm gonna point it out. But that time capsule workbook, there's a page to document all celebrations and events that happened during this time and how they were celebrated. So I think you can get really creative with it. Take screenshots of Zoom hangouts, right, to include in it, or whatever else. And so it just kind of helps make meaning out of a bad situation. I think emphasizing the importance of physical distancing, right? And I'm saying physical very intentionally. I think social distancing, we want to maintain social connection, right? So it really is about physical distancing. And so if your teen is protesting, or your child is protesting, it's not fair that I can't see my friends, or I can't do this, to validate that frustration and to emphasize that this is the right thing to do right now, and that we're all doing our part to stop the spread of this virus. And so, emphasizing that greater good, I think, is super important. There's actually a research study that looked at the SARS and the Ebola outbreaks in Africa and found that people are better able to cope when they think about the altruistic reasons that they're doing it. And so pointing out to our young people that they're making sacrifices right now, just not just for their own health and safety, but for the greater good. And that actually can be very empowering. And then looking for alternatives, right? And I think this is all about how you come at it and how you approach it. So, if you ask your teenager to plan a Zoom dinner event with friends as a replacement for prom, probably going to get a lot of eye rolls, a lot of frustration, maybe some yelling. And so really, I think validating, right, emphasizing that you get that this is not the same thing, and coming up with alternatives is better than nothing. And so, enlisting their help in coming up with safe alternatives to honor these milestones. I think you'll get a lot more buy-in that way. And reminding our teens, our young adults, it's not just them, or any of our kids, it's not just them that are missing out, everybody is, right? And so maybe they can come together with their friends and come up with a way to honor what they've missed, right? So maybe they can come up with some way to do a virtual graduation. Something I saw that was very, very cool is that one high school, and I forget where, it was like somewhere on the East Coast, is doing they set up an Instagram and they're doing a virtual yearbook, which is something I actually hadn't thought about, right? Like, our kids this year, they're not getting yearbooks and getting to sign each other's yearbooks. And so they're posting one picture of each senior with a thing about where they're going to college, and then people can comment on that person's picture as opposed to writing their yearbook. And so I just thought that was a really cool way that the school was honoring their senior class. But kids can do it too. They can start their own stuff. Or planning special events for after the pandemic has ended, right? So maybe it's a trip with close friends, or some other way to celebrate. And so really enlisting kids' help in coming up with their alternatives, right? This is their milestone that they're missing. And so how do they want to honor it? And then again, really emphasizing these activities are not going to replace these missed events, right? It's not the same. And at the same time, finding ways to honor their accomplishments can really help them cope. And, biggest thing, I think it's important to remember that we're all doing the very, very best that we can. We're not prepared for this. Nobody trained us for this. We're doing the best we can. I just want to run through a few resources really quick, and then we'll open it up for questions. Check out our free parent support groups on our website. Those are awesome. We have one specific for ADHD and for learning disorders, but we also just started one that is running weekly that is more just related to general parenting during shelter in place. And then these flyers down below are support groups or process groups for high schoolers and for young adults. And so I think sometimes our kids they need that social connection, and they need that extra support of how to manage this. And at that age, they often respond better to hearing suggestions from folks their own age and not from adults. And so these are really awesome process groups. It's just a place for kids to go on Zoom, of course, but a place for kids to go and really talk to each other about what this is like. And so all the information from that is on our website, or you can email careteam@chconline.org to get more information. And then these slides are going to be put up on our website, so you'll be able to access the links that are embedded here. But there's various things, workbooks for kids on how to deal with this pandemic. This first one is a children's book for kids under 7 that just explains what coronavirus is. There's a workbook on responding to change and loss from the National Alliance for Grieving Children. This is the time capsule I was talking about. And so there's a link for that. And then there's a really, really awesome workbook for anxiety related to coronavirus for teens and adults. And then there's some other links. There's a link to Dr. Kessler talking about grief, a website for coping skills for kids to manage anxiety, which has a ton of awesome resources. And then I recently just learned about this. I don't know if you guys have heard about it, but CNN did a town hall with Sesame Street. And so the whole cast of Sesame Street is on there explaining various aspects of this shelter in place in a very child-friendly way. And so that is a link that is up there as well. So I'm going to stop talking for a minute. Questions?
Awesome. That was wonderful to listen to, Dr. Khosravi. Thank you so much for explaining all of that with us. We did get some questions come in, so I'll lob them in a second, and then audience, feel free to keep submitting. So here we go. So going shopping has become a very anxiety-driven process. I cannot go without feeling exhausted afterward and seriously needing a nap. Is this normal? Is there anything I can do to feel less anxious about that?
That's a great question. I think, part of it is completely normal, right? When we're going grocery shopping or any kind of shopping at this point, we are, in a way, exposing ourselves to the virus, and just the threat level feels higher than when we're just sitting at home. And so, our brains, that fight or flight system is going, right? That hypervigilance is happening. And so we're scanning for threats constantly. There's just a heightened sense of anxiety. And so that fatigue actually makes a lot of sense. It's just our body's way of responding to that increase in stress hormone that is being pumped through our bodies during that experience. And so, definitely, folks, feel free to put in the chat if you have other ideas or suggestions, but I would say what I found helpful is making a list and then sorting my list by kind of where I know things are in the store. So I try to just go to my local Safeway and not venture out too far, so that I know where things are, and I will put things in that order so that my trip can be a lot more efficient, I guess. I'm in and out a lot faster, and so that makes me feel less stressed. And the other thing, definitely looking into delivery services, though I know that I've tried and it's almost impossible to get a time window, but kind of keeping an eye out on that and just maybe decreasing the amount of times we have to go to the store. But yeah, I think unfortunately that's just part of what makes this time so stressful, is that these little things that we honestly didn't give a second thought to before are incredibly stressful and do make us feel very exhausted.
Thank you. All right, next question. Are there any alarming signs that are cause for concern as my child is mourning the loss of their life experiences? Should I be concerned if there are various behaviors that are out of the norm?
That's a great question. So, I think a lot of the things that we talked about are very normal and are just part of that natural bereavement process. And so, for kids who are feeling more stressed, more anxious, if they already were sort of susceptible to some of those things, we're going to see that more. For some kids who maybe had a better handle on their anxiety or their depression, we might be seeing a reemergence of symptoms. And so, largely when I try to think about how much is it impairing to their daily functioning and how distressed are they by it. And so that's sort of my gauge of how much of this is normal and when should I seek mental health care or other types of care and support. And so, I think if you have a kiddo who can't get out of bed or is just completely unable to do any schoolwork or is kind of deteriorating in terms of their functioning, that's when I would be a little bit more concerned. Definitely if you suspect self-harm or your child expresses thoughts of suicide or urges for self-harm or suicide, those are definitely red flags. I would definitely be looking for some extra support around that. But yeah, I think anything, and I think also parents know, you guys know your kids best. And so really, I think following your gut instinct, when something is wrong. And so really also anything that's out of the norm, right? You've all seen your kids in stressful situations before, of course, nothing like this, but we've all seen our kids stressed. And so, if it just feels kind of like, yeah, their emotions are, heightened, they're more irritable, they're more depressed, that might all kind of be within the range of normal. And if you start seeing things that you've never seen before, you have a kid who isn't sleeping suddenly or isn't eating or isn't getting out of bed, right? And that is just not behavior you've seen from your child before. Anything that's sort of out of that norm for your child, those would be areas of concern. And so, I think one of the other things that CHC offers and a lot of other agencies in the community offer are free 30-minute consultations. And so that is actually the perfect sort of question for one of those consultations. You can just contact our care team and they'll get you set up, but it's just a 30-minute Zoom or phone meeting where you can sort of share some of those things specific to your child. And they're done by our licensed clinicians. And so a psychologist can really kind of get some more information and let you know, do they think that your child might benefit from therapy or from any sort of extra support, or does it seem like these are more just the natural grief reactions that we talked about?
Thank you. And a specific follow-up, what if the child just holds up in his or her room and refuses to talk to or listen to the parents? Do you have any advice for that situation?
Yes, that's a hard one. And kids do that. I think, being a consistent presence, right? Continuing to be there. So, if you're knocking on the door and just kind of seeing something from the other side of the bedroom door or whatnot, just continuing that. Kids, even when they don't want to talk to us, often like knowing that we are there and that we're not backing away or giving up when they push us away. And so continuing that. It could also be about presenting them the option, you don't want to talk to me, do you want to talk to somebody else? A lot of teenagers don't feel comfortable talking to parents, but will totally be happy to go to therapy and tell a therapist, right? Especially if they know that therapy is confidential. So it might be, do you want to talk to somebody else? Or it could be just another trusted adult, right? Asking them, is there somebody else in your life, an adult, a supportive adult that you would feel comfortable talking to? It could also just be encouraging them to connect with friends. I think often we see that kind of withdrawal and just refusal to come out of their room or talk to anybody when our kids are feeling more lonely and isolated. And often it's unfortunately this vicious cycle where if you start to feel that way, then you stop reaching out to others, then you actually feel more lonely and isolated. Now you don't want to talk to anybody. And so it's this downward spiral. And so even just encouraging them to connect with friends can be huge. Let me think of other strategies, because that's a great question, and it does happen. I think the other thing is, you know, we did spend a lot of time talking about validating and talking, and for some kids, they're not talkers, or they don't want to talk. And so removing the pressure or the expectation that you need to talk, that if they come out of the room, they have to have this conversation, right? And so it could actually be not talking, but instead just engaging in activities with the child. And so, you know, letting them know, like, hey, we don't have to talk about how you're feeling. We don't have to talk about what's going on right now. That's fine. But why don't you come out of your room? Let's all have dinner together as a family. Or, hey, we're watching a movie. Come join us. And so sometimes that's enough to get them out of the room. Sometimes I think kids think parents are going to make them talk or want them to talk, and if they're just not ready for that, or they just don't want to, then we're going to get a lot of refusal and a lot of power struggles. And so often it is helpful to remove that expectation or that pressure, and to just have them engage in activities with the family, or just, you know, whatever gets them out of their room, even if it's just to go sit silently in the backyard. That's still better than, you know, being in the room. Getting some sunlight and fresh air is always helpful.
Great, those are great tips. Next question, changing gears a little bit. How do we help children understand when they see the tents on the street and they've been heard that people could get sick being in close quarters? They want to help, but they've been told not to interact with unknown people. I think the children are seeing how this virus has been affecting society as a whole, and it is hard to soothe those anxiety-filled thoughts. Do you have suggestions about how to handle this situation?
Absolutely, that is a great question. And I think I'm going to say it one more time, validate, right? Validating those anxieties, that fear, you know, letting kids know it makes sense to feel that way when you hear these things on the news, or you see these things, or you hear other people talking about them. And so really validating that emotion, and then helping them, you know, a few different thoughts or different parts of the question. I think one is to help kids understand what those tents on the street are and why that is happening. And depending on the age of the child, you know, of course you want to be developmentally appropriate and explain it to kids in an age appropriate way. But I think, you know, the very basic is explaining that some folks actually they don't have the means or the resources or the privilege to be able to, excuse me, to be able to distance. And so that is actually just their best option or their life circumstance. And depending on the age of the child, of course, you can get into more details about why that is. And so, and then really reinforcing and emphasizing their want to help, right? That is huge. And so certainly, definitely don't want them interacting with, you know, leaving their house to interact with those folks, because that's just not in line with our shelter-in-place guidelines, but really helping them brainstorm what are ways that they can help. Because there are ways to help in a way that is physically distancing, right? And so kind of looking up, you know, can they organize some sort of, actually, this is an idea I got on Nextdoor. Can they organize some sort of canned drive, like canned food drive? So there's somebody in my neighborhood who did that. One of their kids did this. And so they posted it on Nextdoor that they had put this like huge box on their front porch. And so people, you know, and encouraging people to just come by and drop off canned food. So still maintaining our physical distance. And then they donated all of that to, what is it called? The food bank, the local food bank. And so they had donated it, and that was that kid's way of helping, right? So we have these different ways of helping that are still in line with that social distancing. And so really encouraging them, if they want to help, that's huge. And it gives them the sense of service, right? And we feel better when we're helping each other, when we're helping other people, and when we're contributing to society. And so really emphasizing and helping them come up with ways to do that. And then in terms of soothing anxiety, I think really naming it for the kids, like this is anxiety, and yes, it is hard to soothe, and being really validating and teaching kids strategies to stay in the moment. And so anxiety really is, like I said, this future-oriented emotion. And often comes up when we're focusing on things that we cannot control. And so helping kids understand, like, you know, we can come up with ways to help, and that's awesome, and we can't control that there is a homeless population and we can't house them all. Like, that is not within my control or your control. And so let's focus on what we can do to help, and let's really try to keep our thoughts in the present. And so helping them with mindfulness or with those grounding techniques, or really encouraging them to just focus on what is in their control, how they can help. And if you notice that those anxious thoughts are taking over and they can't stay in the present, sometimes distraction is the best coping tool. So movies, TV, books, talking to friends, anything that distracts them will help just kind of get through that moment.
Thank you for unpacking that. That was a big one. So for elementary school age children, this commenter says, your visuals are great. Would it be possible to get some to use for elementary age children?
Yes. So I'm gonna scroll back through the slides real quick. So this breathing technique image actually is out of a book for elementary age kiddos, and so this is super helpful. And if you if you go, so once this presentation gets posted on our resource library, if you click on this link for the coping skills to help manage anxiety, that's a whole website dedicated to mostly younger children, elementary age children, of how to manage anxiety. And they have a ton of great visuals and different things. And I'm trying to see, one second, let me pull it up. Because I can't, it's a really simple link that I can just share with you right now. But they have a lot of great visuals. One second, my computer is being slow. So it's copingskillsforkids.com. Very simple. And so they have a lot of really great visuals. And I believe they have it on their website, or you can just Google it. Emotion wheels, that's another one I really like for elementary age school kids. There's really simple emotion wheels online, which can help them with identifying their emotions. So for our younger ones, I think often they have a hard time putting words to their emotions, which makes sense. And so there's really simple emotion wheels that you can Google, and just have kids point to what they're feeling, and that can be a super helpful one as well.
Awesome. Thank you for those resources again. And then I'll copy in a couple of the links in the chat, and we'll send this out after for more follow-up. So back to my questions. Okay, so switching gears again. How do we replace those milestone events that honor our kids' transitions? Not only is my extrovert child experiencing loss of coming of age events, I as a parent feel like I'm grieving over missed experiences and opportunities too.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's a loss, not just for our kids, but for parents as well, right? We're not getting to see our kids experience those events. And so, yeah, that's, I think one of the biggest things is to come up with alternatives. And, you know, it's hard to do. And I think the internet is such a wonderful resource because people have gotten very creative, and I've seen a lot of things online that are really awesome things that I never would have thought of. And so I think, you know, really collaboratively with your kids, talking about how do they want to honor those milestones, but thinking for yourself as a parent, what do you want to do, right? So, you know, for birthdays, I think a lot of people are doing birthday parties on Zoom for kids. And so, you know, coordinating with kids' parents to get their friends on Zoom and having some sort of virtual birthday. You know, like I mentioned, there's that the idea of like a yearbook on Instagram. I know lots of people who have been doing parades, like with cars for birthdays or other events. And so I also wonder, I'm sure there's a way to do that for like some sort of graduation event. But I know some people who've had birthdays and for their kids, and so have had friends and family drive by at a designated time and have had this sort of parade. And so the other, you know, the friends and the cousins and whatnot have had made signs that they hang out the car windows, they drive by and that kind of thing. And so there's kind of ways to commemorate some of these things in this very alternative strange way that we really never thought we would be doing. So yeah, I think it's just important to kind of find some of those things, and then to also really spend some time thinking about, you know, which of these things can we do in the future when the shelter in place ends and we can gather as groups again. And so that might be quite a ways in the future. I don't think any of us know what that timeline looks like. But, you know, thinking about, can some of these things actually just be postponed, and can we think about ways to do these things in the future so that maybe, you know, it's not ever quite the same and it's still a loss in a way, but at least, you know, we and our kids have something to look forward to in the future of like how we know we're going to celebrate these milestones.
All right. Just a couple more questions and then we will wrap it up. So if you have any extra comments, folks, please submit them. Next question, Pardis. These symptoms of grief look a lot like symptoms of depression, and that is so scary. How can I tell what's going on? How do I know when my child needs more help than I can give?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, you know, I think the symptoms look very similar because they are, right? There is such a huge overlap between grief and depression. And so, you know, I think where healthy grief might cross the line into kind of more complex grief, or a more problematic, I guess, form of grief is if you or your child notice like it's all you can think about, or there's actually excessive avoidance of reminders of those triggers of grief. If there's any self-harm or suicidality, or like thoughts about suicide, urges to self-harm, right? Those are all kind of red flags that it's just a little bit beyond what typical grief looks like. And so extra mental health support would be indicated. And again, I always go back to the idea of how impacted is the child's functioning, right? So we can feel depressed and we can feel these grief feelings, and we can, and it's very hard and it's very distressing, and we can still get done what we need to get done. We can socialize with our friends or family. And when it gets to the point where we're not able to do the things that we need to do, and we're just completely isolating or cutting off all social contact, that is, again, one of those times where I would be a little bit more concerned and would be thinking about getting extra support or outside help. But yes, absolutely correct that overlap is huge. Grief and depression do look very similar. And for people who have experienced previous depressive episodes, experiencing grief often can trigger a new depressive episode. And so it really, they're very sort of tangled together, and it's hard to parse them apart. I think if you have a kiddo who has been in therapy in the past for depression or anxiety, it does not hurt to kind of go back for a few booster sessions and let the clinician decide if they think, you know, a few booster sessions is enough, or the child needs more. Because often a huge stressor like this can bring about kind of a reemergence of those symptoms.
Thank you for that advice. That is necessary and good to know. And then our last question for you for the evening. Do you have any parting thoughts? If there was one thing you wanted to make sure parents knew about sadness and loss, what would it be?
Oh gosh, that's a great question. I think the one thing, if you take away nothing else from this, is to take away that this truly is a number of losses that we're all experiencing. This truly is a grief process. We are all in the midst of grieving. And, you know, everyone has experienced different kinds of losses, and everyone's experience is a little bit different. But this is just a collective grief across the world in a way that we've just not ever seen before in our lifetimes, at least. And so, you know, being kind to ourselves and our kids and cutting ourselves slack, and remembering that we're all doing our best, and however we feel is okay, and just giving ourselves space to feel it, giving our kids space to feel it, and to listen to ourselves, right? And to listen to what we need, and really check in with ourselves throughout the day, and check in with our bodies and what do we need, and making sure that we're taking care of ourselves. because we can't take care of our kids if we don't take care of ourselves. So I think, long story short, this is hard. We're all doing our best, and self-care is so important.
Well, thank you for your words of wisdom tonight. I definitely learned a lot. I think we all did. And participants, thank you for being here, spending your evening with us. CHC will be gladly following up by sending out the recording, and you'll see that soon. And we'll also send out a follow-up survey. I'll paste the link here if you want to take care of that ahead of time. And thank you again. We really appreciate you being here, and we hope to see you at the next one. Thank you all.
Thank you.